It is so good to have you back on board. You know that sound is the Unfiltered Band, which means, yes, another episode of Unfiltered is coming at you right here and now. Here we go indeed. It is episode 38, entitled My Most Memorable Moments in New York Sports. Thank you, Unfiltered Band. Always memorable, always invisible. Thank you so much for your help. You, not invisible, and this episode is going to prove that. I'll explain in a second. Be part of this Unfiltered revolution at Casey Stern. If you're watching on Twitter, or if you're getting involved already on Twitter, get into the Twitter bio, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like all the videos, watch them, comment with ideas that you have, debates about lists, whatever it might be, or if vice versa, get on the Twitter at Casey Stern, want to have you part of this revolution. And a large part of this, really the biggest part, is the relationship, and I've talked about this, that we're building together. That we're going to be in this thing together, that we're going to do this thing together and grow together. People helping people. I like it when she jokes. This is why I can't watch Wedding Crashers. Then I just recite the lines for at least, I promise you, like 4 more podcasts, and then I'll stop doing this. Watch it one time, and boom, everything, it's like, just popped in there. What popped in there, Ray? Different movie. Talk about interaction, and I want to credit this episode has been produced and created in a lot of ways by Jason in Albany, a member of the Revolution, who jumped on board and asked me to put together a podcast where I would put together a top 5 list of the best New York sports moments in my lifetime. So, Jason, I kind of cheated a little bit, or at least altered things. Because, I'm going to do a top 10. And I'm calling this the most memorable sports moments in New York sports in my lifetime. Why? Because I've got 2 hats. I've got a fan hat and I've got a broadcasting hat. And those things sometimes cross over, but the fan doesn't disappear. And you know, when I'm broadcasting, obviously got to handle things at specific moments I'm going to break down and give you a little behind the scenes from. But I wanted to do 10. That's number 1. And then I realized that a different set of numbers, 1940, were the first thing that came to mind, and I'll explain for those of you who don't know what that is representing or what I'm referring to, why I could not do the top moments in New York sports during my lifetime. I couldn't do that because I'd have to put, if we're being honest, and if I'm being a broadcaster, which I am, the 1994 New York Rangers. After years as an Islander fan chanting 1940, which was the last time that they won, you know, Mark Messier and the series against the Devils and Howie Rose with Matteau and all that. It was all great. For the sport, great for the city, not great for me. I can't put that in my top, right? I wasn't going to like wax poetic about that. I just couldn't do it. So as soon as I thought of that, I was writing down a list, I was like, I can't do that. So I got to do memorable. Let me tell you why I took lifetime off and I made it more my most memorable moments in New York sports, because you're not going to hear me talk about the 1980s Islanders here. Now, I was a huge fan of those teams during the latter end of it, certainly during Pat LaFontaine's years, who was my favorite hockey player ever. I was at a Stanley Cup playoff game when I was just a little kid, like 4 or 5. I'm not going to sit there and, you know, delve in deep with you on that. I do have one specific thing that's in this list that happened when I was 8, but I'll explain why I thought that that was okay and how it played a role in my life. I'm going to be very personal in these stories. I love doing things like this because I really don't know. And I know with some people, a lot of stuff is shtick. I mean, it's really not for me. Like, I really don't know. Like, am I going to get emotional? Am I going to get on tangents? Am I going to, how many stories am I going to tell? What kind of, because all I did in creating this, and this was, in the last day since this was mentioned to me, was I wrote down a bunch of things off the top of my head and then went through to see if I was missing anything, because I want to make sure the top of my head, which is, sometimes all muddled and certainly not with a lot of hair right now, was going to be the right way. And then I started to put them in an order, and then I made cuts, and then I had honorable mentions, and then I changed the order based on, trying to keep that idea of memorable and what meant to me. There are going to be people who are going to look at this list and be like, how is number 4 here and number 8 there? Like, this number 8 would be my number 1. Well, maybe yours, it's not mine. You asked me for a list, right? I'm not saying you for Jason in Albany, but for everybody. So the first thing I got to say is credit to the Unfiltered Revolution And please do not hesitate to get on board because I want you to be a part of this thing. That's number one. And I want you to give me more requests on ideas you have, on lists you have. I mean, I love getting involved in this kind of stuff. And I want to bring more interaction. I'll have more info on this as we go, but I'm going to start doing a lot more live shows so that you guys can chat with me during this. I'll have info on that here in the next week or so. I wanted to start with, before we get to the best, we have to at least flush out some of the worst. I could have written down 100 things, but I wrote down a few that came into my head when I thought about, it's like the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. 1999, Game 7, Kenny Rogers throws a 4-pitch walk to Andrew Jones. I throw a television and break it. I was not pleased. This was a very difficult moment for me. That's an unbelievable game for people who don't remember it. Mets are down, 7-0, and then Piazza hits, I think it was a 3-run jack off of Maddox. They ripped on him. They get even. They're in it. And then, of course, most Met situations until Edwin Diaz, hopefully we're not jinxing it here with Sugar, at the back end, something screwed up happens. Cue a Benitez, or I love Johnny Franco, or John Franco, or whoever else you want in the past, and then he goes the other way. In this case, Kenny Rogers, while Octavio Dotel, who was unhittable at the point, was in the bullpen, and I don't want to get people upset. And if Jim Duquette is listening, I've had this conversation with him a million times about how he survived it, looking down on the field when Bobby V didn't make the right move, and Bobby V made a lot of right moves. I love Bob Valentine, but that was not good for me. Michael Jordan against the Knicks, I could just in total, Michael Jordan against the Knicks, the whole time. Michael Jordan against the Knicks. Everything Michael Jordan against the Knicks. Destroying the Knicks, teasing us like we were in a series, and then, just obliterating us the way he performed at the Garden, the unbeatable nature of those teams. John Starks, 2 for 17 in the 93-94 finals, which was very difficult, 94-95 finals, difficult for me. Or it's 93-94, yeah. Very difficult for me. Very difficult. Had a shot in the corner in Game 6, could have ended that, go to Game 7. You want to order a code red. Why are you still shooting? I know you're a shooter, but where's Rolando Blackman? And we can go through all of that, and why are you passing to him? First time I ever interviewed Derek Harper for NBA for Turner. True story. I had to pause, and this happened. We were talking about, he was covering the Mavs. Started the interview with, I need to ask you about passing to John Starks. So that's in the list. Of worst, for sure. The lean years of the Islanders with the fish sticks, and I've told this story before on the air, but this is true, that I was on Garden Vision once and almost got into a fight as a 15-year-old with some dude in his 40s, but I had an entire section screaming and cursing at me for wearing an Islander jersey in the Garden. The Islanders took the lead. I wrote on my back, on the jersey, ruined it, I love fish sticks, on my Pierre Turgeon jersey. And then the next thing you know, I was nearly in a fight, and then I was on Garden Vision getting booed. It was an unbelievable event for me. I mean, I love, it's my only moment really feeling like a heel like at WrestleMania. It was great. But those lean years in John Spano, no. Deshaun Jackson run back against the Giants with the punt, disaster. The Jeff Garcia comeback with Terrell Owens, when Strahan and the Giants had that thing in the bag in the playoffs, that was a disaster. And, there are 9,000 Met moments I could put in there. And these are just some of them already that I've mentioned the other teams that I root for. But, oh, geez. I mean, Luis Castillo's pop-up, Mr. Met with the finger, all the Mickey Callaway stuff. You can go back to Jeremy Burnett's twice and what Ryan Thompson and all these other people were going to be, and then they weren't. And, Generation K and Vince Coleman with the fireworks. And then, the team that was supposed to be the best team ever, that, they'd gotten Eddie Murray and all those guys. And then that screwed up. And we can go on forever and ever and ever, amen, okay? Really, with the Mets. There's like a million of them. Some of the worst to kind of flush out. I didn't want to have a lot of honorable mentions in this list because even though I ended up having, and it really wasn't as, there's so many, but the ones that I thought off the cuff for Jason and for everybody else listening, I only had 17 that I had written that it was okay, I feel really good about these. For me, a personal list. Okay, this is a personal list. And I feel badly because there is one very relevant Yankee moment here in this list, but I think Jason, looking at his profile when I thanked him for coming up with this idea is a Yankee fan, and I can't give you like all these Yankee moments I love because I'd be lying, right? Now you want to give me best moments and you want to take the broadcaster side, I could do that. We're trying to be unfiltered and really kind of hit you, and this time from the fan side if I can, right? Because we're not analyzing, the trade deadline right now. So I had like 17. There's only two honorable mentions. There's actually one. There's only one that I put here that I really wanted to mention. And I almost had it at 10, which I'm not going to tell you what 10 is yet, but then I didn't put it there. It's a bigger moment, really, than many of these on my list. But the 2011 New York Giants season. And what you're going to hear in this list, what I had to do a couple of times, is give you like a playoff run or a year. But I gave you a seminal or pivotal moment that specifically would be the moment, but it's not just that day. It's what it meant in the run and all that stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I remember being on New Year's Day. I was at the game. Giants-Cowboys at the end of the season. Giants finish 9-7, win the division. Cowboys finish 8-8. It's for the division. Cowboy fans who are the worst, as we know. It is written over here behind me. It says it right there. They're the worst. And I wanted to beat them so badly. And I'm a huge Giant fan, diehard. Since I'm I don't even know. Joe Morris was the first football player I remember loving because he looked like he was my height. And then I love Dave Meggett, and I used to rock a Dave Meggett jersey all the time. I used to go in the bathroom at Giant Stadium years after, and people would be like, "Dude, that's awesome! You got a Meggett jersey." And then all that stuff happened off the field, and then I didn't wear it again after that. Even when he was a Patriot and doing that, I was still wearing it, but then not so much after that. He was a Jet too, I think. Parcells took him everywhere. Him and Pepper Johnson, right? So that game, Victor Cruz goes down the sideline. I want to say it's 70 yards. Maybe it's 80. And he was so good in that game. And the Giants beat up on the Cowboys. And it was awesome. Now, I put that season because really that run was a lot of fun. Bradshaw sitting down when he could score a touchdown. They probably should have been up 2 TDs in the first half of that Super Bowl, and they were not. They beat Brady for the second time. The other one will clearly be on this list, and as it should be for me. It was a great run. It was a lot of fun. I mean, not to piss off Falcons fans down here in Atlanta, but from the 24-2 game and the game where it's I always say, it's the Eli Manning, you really don't think I'm tough game. I don't care what kind of face Eli Manning showed all the time. That game where, Kyle Williams fumbles twice and they barely beat the 49ers. And it was not a great game. It was not, even the famous one, go back to, and I did not have the first Giants Super Bowl in here, at least that I was a part of as a fan, over the Broncos with Phil Simms. I did not put the Scott Norwood one in here. It's not in here. There's so many moments as fans, but it's pivotal to me. And they were in the 17. They didn't make the 10, both of those. But that 15-13 was it? I think the final, the 5 Matt Barr field goals, all of that. That was an unbelievable game. The NFC Championship game against the 49ers with Montana and company. This was not as well played a game, but Eli Manning was getting his ass whooped the entire game. He was getting beaten up every which way to Sunday, and then on Sunday in this game, and he stood up and hung in there just enough to get the win. They get into the Super Bowl, they beat Brady. That's on the outskirts of town. Did not make my 10. The other Giants, 2 Super Bowls, and by the way, it's nice to wow, it's I've been around, I've been a huge fan for 4 of them. It's, certainly a different life than I've lived with the Knicks, right? That did not make the list. The 2015 Mets are not in the list. It was fun. It was a good run. It was a surprise run. It's not in there for me. It's not. And there are a bunch of others that maybe you would think for me would and didn't make it. Because I had a couple that are kind of one-offs, I think, for some people that you'll see when I get in here that I really wanted to have on this list. And they're personal to me. Look, it's the same way I did the movies. I want you to share your own personal stories. And the only way that you can do that and feel to do that in responding to a list or whatever it is to feel that because you're getting something I say, right, in a story I tell makes you think of that. I'm also going to take you behind the scenes uncovering some of these, and I think you're going to enjoy that. Got a couple of kooky stories about a couple of these that I actually covered. But here we go. Thank you, Jason in Albany. With the worst and the honorable mentions out of the way, here is, without further ado, my top 10 most memorable moments as a New York sports fan. Number 10, and I had to expand this a little bit, but the Islanders' runs to the conference final in 2000 and 2021. One of the things I want to make sure that I do in lists like this is I don't care if you're a hockey fan or not, and a lot of people are not, right? And there'll be diehard Islander fans who I know love follow and listen to me who, would get off on that kind of stuff, and others would be like, what the hell's hockey, right? Don't care. I want to tell you why this is in this category for me. And I almost made a purposeful point to put it in at 10 instead of some of the giant Super Bowls I just mentioned. Going through COVID for all of us was an extremely hard time. I had come off the hardest time of my life and something going through I would never wish on anybody. And then to the back end of COVID, went through something that for me personally was harder to go through than that. Sandwiched in between there, during all of the low moments, there was one thing outside of, please understand, being a father and all those things we put first, right, that I could rely on for escape, for comfort, for love, for feeling, for excitement, for all of that. The New York Islanders runs, especially that second one. That second one, when they lost, and I remember the date for another reason, but when they lost on the 26th of June, it totally just broke me. In that Game 7 when, Yannick Gourde scored the goal and they lost 1-0. I was so invested in that run and that team. I was watching the replays of the games just to, hear even Eddie O and company talking about the team in that manner. It's because it was a time period in my life, and I'm sure for a lot of you, that certainly, forget about just root for this team, but if you were a Tampa Bay Lightning fan at the time, or if you rooted for, the Dodgers during whoever, whatever teams, the Rams ended up winning in these different sports. To see an underdog group that nobody respected pull together and put together those kind of special moments and the special run that they had in 2020 in the bubble, that was some of the coolest shit as a fan I've ever lived. I was so hyped. It makes me, it makes me feel emotional. I wanted to cry and applaud that team off the ice in person. Couldn't when they lost in that Game 7. It was hard because I wanted to, and it was only 5-6 hour drive away, and I couldn't go. Because of the kid. It's fine, but I couldn't go because of the kids, but I wanted to. I cried. Yeah. I was so proud of what they did and how they performed and how they were kind of like a representation of, I think, all of us who were going through things at the time with COVID and the pandemic and the unknowns, especially with families, right, and all that stuff. And I specifically was going through an ordeal I wouldn't wish on anybody. And it was like the toughest point in my life, really, in total. And that team was there for me, in a weird way, right? Maybe that doesn't make sense, but I think for diehard sports fans who live, the way I do with sports my whole life, it will. They were there for me. Ryan Pulock with the save. All of that, they were there. Didn't matter what was happening, how bad things felt for me, how low I felt. They were lifting me. They gave you, hope, and it was an escape. It was an unbelievable relationship I had with those two teams as a fan. So I put it in at 10, and I wanted it in there for that reason. But it was a different vibe. Time period, what I was going through, what they were doing. The fact that they weren't even supposed to be expected. And then, after they did it, the second time, nobody expected them to do it then either. Nobody was giving them, a chance at all. And they were right there. That second time, the first time felt kind of lucky. The second time, they were right there. They were right there. It didn't happen, but boy, they were right there. There was some kind of a feel you felt. Everly had that overtime goal, and you get into it's oh man, I think they're going to do it. I they had a chance to win clearly, right? But they lost 1-0, I think. But I was so tied and invested to the people on that team, the story they were telling, and what it meant for me in my life. And I honestly, if you go back and getting choked up thinking about it, I remember, and I don't know exactly what I said, but I remember consciously tweeting a thank you about it at the time, and I meant it. Those runs were meaningful in my life. I don't, the second run, I can honestly say, I can't go back to thinking through it. I can't even think about explaining to you how I would have gotten through that spring and early summer without them. So thank you again. But those two runs were amazing. So I got that at number 10. Number 9 for me was an event that was the first time I ever saw my father cry. And I wrote an essay that I don't know if it got me into college, but it was certainly part of it. But my college essay, which was entitled The First Time I Saw My Father Cry, very literal, about a day on September 4th, 1993, in which my father, the Yankee fan, came into my room on a Sunday morning, and it was supposed to be nice weather, and didn't have any plans that day. And, from what I recall, and I was 15 at the time. It must have been like 10 in the morning. Game was an afternoon game. Like, we'd had to, like, decide now. Like, are we go? Like, because the Bronx is not close to where I lived. He's like, you want to go to the Yankee game? Manny Ramirez, who was at that time a big story, and he was coming home, and your first chance to see him. I've said this before, I think maybe on another pod. I've certainly, said it on the air. But I was at the game as a kid against the Seattle Mariners. Randy Johnson started that game, but where Ken Griffey Jr. jumps over the wall at Yankee Stadium, it's one of the 3 or 4 seminal plays in his whole career that are shown. I was at that game. So, like, my father, this was always like a thing that I would do, like and I loved going to Yankee Stadium. I have no problem admitting I love Shea. I think I've told this story before. It's not in here. The close of Shea was not in here. But Ed Randall and I were the last 2 people, and it was at the same time, who were ever on the field at Shea Stadium before they closed the lights out for the last time. I sat there after we were done with work, and at the time I was co-hosting, I was doing stuff for their site and for a couple other places with John Franco. And Ed Randall was doing some stuff, and we were the only 2 people left on the field. As much as I love Shea, Yankee Stadium was like a different thing. I mean, you walk into Yankee Stadium, you're through the tunnel, and it's like, my God. I mean, you get goose pimples, goosebumps, tingles. It's like climbing the rope in gym class. So September 4th, 1993, on a Sunday, my father asked if I wanted to go to the game. Called my buddy Rob, said, "You want to go to the game?" We went to the game. We had no tickets. Scalp tickets outside. I think we got there like maybe an hour before, maybe less. And my father had gotten us tickets. We were like, I want to say like maybe 15, 20 rows from first base. And it was just a day. Now, just to make you understand how crazy this story is, and this game should be a 30 for 30. This life should be a 30 for 30. I was actually talking to somebody about this not long ago, like a week or 2 ago, that I want to help. I want to maybe be part of some kind of documentary that's made about Jim Abbott. The idea that somebody is even pitching on a big league mound with one hand is unbelievably crazy. The fact that you can make it to the big leagues and have the fortitude to do that, and you think back to, like, as a kid and ridicule, and how did you survive that, and how did you, and I've talked to him before, and anybody who has, I mean, it's remarkable. He's a humble guy, and look, the only reason this story isn't bigger, and there are people who probably even listening to this that are younger people don't even realize that somebody did this. Forget about just have success in the big leagues and be a great dude, but throw a no-hitter. I remember running into Matt Noakes, who caught this game at winter meetings a few years ago. And we were just talking, and like it took 2 seconds before the only thing I wanted to talk about was this. This should be a 30 for 30 for like his story, but this game. You got Carlos Baerga, who at the time, not the Mets version, okay? Manny Ramirez, With Lofton. I mean, these are dudes, right? In '93 that are on these Cleveland Indians. And here's Jim Abbott, who, like, the fact that I don't even, from that day, right? I don't even remember, and I have the Jim Dandy newspaper from the next day after the no-hitter. I mean, I've got some stuff still from it. But think about how, like, we had no social media then. Can you imagine what a big deal it would be every start? What a big deal it would be that he was even in the big leagues? Like, I feel badly because even though there would be an idiot aspect and quotient to that of people who would, put somebody down because they're different and all of that, like, what a spokesman, like, he could be in this kind of a marketplace in terms of social media. Being a guy who, how could you pitch with, what do you mean you don't have a hand? What do you mean you're switching gloves? What are you talking about? Like, dude, how are you fielding? How are you doing anything? I remember that no-hitter so vividly. I remember some funny, weird stories. In the 8th inning, I remember specifically there was a guy that was so drunk he couldn't find his seat. And everyone was so locked into every pitch. And I swear, like, people were ready to just, like, start pouncing and beat the shit out of this dude because he was driving everybody nuts. Like, if looking for his seat, what row he's in, he was wasted. And I remember just, because it always reminds me, like, when I think back to it, like, how locked in. People were so locked in. Because you realize you weren't just part of, and I've been to a couple of them. I mean, it is what it is. But to be at a no-hitter and then, like, Jim Abbott is, like, the story itself, it was ludicrous. Like, it was amazing. And when I looked over, oh, yeah, that hit me. I just about to say it, and it hit me. When I looked over after it happened, and Matt, the final out was a ground out, Carlos Baerga, grounded out to, I think it was Mike Gallego at second base. You have to check. There's a great play by Boggs in that game, and there's a great play by Bernie Williams in center field. But I think Gallego was the one who fielded the grounder. It was Carlos Baerga. I looked over him. Ooh, second time it just caught me. My father was sobbing. I'd never seen him cry. My whole life till then. Was sobbing. It was so emotional because of how uplifting that was. I mean, look, it was great. And I'm not a Yankee fan. I was rooting for it. It was amazing and all of that. I mean, geez. I mean, please. At the time, there wasn't even interleague yet, like, for another 3 years. Like, they never played each other. There was no rivalry. It was like, okay, the Yankees are spoiled. I don't like them, whatever. But, like, there wasn't any of that. Don Mattingly was one of my favorite players growing up, even though he was a Yankee. But, like, in that moment, like, there was no Yankee or not Yankee. It was like a fan of, like, people, humans, stories. Like, what an unbelievable freaking thing that was to be a part of and watch live. It does not get enough play as a story. Jim Abbott, who, by the way, is on Twitter, you could follow, does not get enough love. Like, oh, people, like, hear this, and it reminds them of it, and they go back and watch the game. I'm sure you could view it somewhere. And, like, I don't know him. Like, go tweet him. I don't care. Give me credit. Like, it's just what this dude accomplished on September 4th of 1993 was amazing. And to be there in that building, for me, my top 10, yeah, for sure. I could have put it higher. For games I was at as a fan, it would have been way higher. But number 9, Jim Abbott, no-hitter, September 4th, 1993. So I've got the Islander runs at 20 and 21. 1993 no-hitter, Jim Abbott at 9. Number 8 is the New York Islanders 1992-1993 playoff run. I was a diehard hockey fan growing up. I still am. Part of what has kept me such a passionate and rabid Islander fan, in addition to loving the sport, is that I have not covered it. Now, I did pre- and post-game for MSG for people who live in New York and remember that for a couple of years, but I was doing Ranger games, and I was not doing the Islanders, right? And yes, I was, and it was fine. It didn't scar me. At least it wasn't 1994, right? But I've never covered hockey on a day in and day out basis. And when you cover a sport, and this has happened to me in baseball, like, look, I'm a huge Met fan, and I'm into it now, and I'm always into it. Highs and lows, anybody who knows me knows that, but it's not the same. once you cover it and you have to be professional and you learn about the game and you learn about the people and you meet people on other teams that you didn't like and then you were like, oh my God, they're likable. So now you can't hate the team as much and all those things that you seeing so much baseball, it wears the fan in you down a bit. It does. Anybody tells you it doesn't is lying. Like, I'm sorry. It just does. That's never happened to me with hockey. The Islanders have always been like, they're not a stone's throw away. They're always at arm's length where it's like I can only reach and touch them as a fan most of the time. In 1992, 1993, I don't even know how to explain what that run was like for me and how emotional of a part of my childhood it became. Now, for people who are just sports fans or not even hockey fans, the two parts of that you will remember because it came across your sports landscape. One was Pierre Turgeon getting roasted in the back by Dale Hunter, and I was at that game. And two, the game where David Volek, and I was not at this one, beat the Penguins, who were going for their third straight cup. And, which the Lightning just tried to do as well. But difficult, clearly, right? But, 4 in a row for the Islanders. But you got Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr and, Kasparaitis and Jagr in that series. And there's so many things to get into. And Turgeon being gone and Ray Ferraro being a hero. In that run, and they lost to the Canadiens, I think it was in 5 games, and who ended up playing the Kings and Barry Melrose with the hair in the Stanley Cup. If Pierre Turgeon is healthy, I still think they were going to make a run. Now, I did not believe that when they started the postseason. But I will tell you, I went to 3 games in the first round against the Capitals and went to 2 against the Penguins. I don't know that I've ever been more invested as a fan in any of these games I'm going to tell you, as a diehard. I don't think I've ever been more invested, more crazy, more with no voice, more with I probably gave myself the flu, more with like somebody would have thought there's something wrong with me, how locked in my friends and I were and invested in those games. I honestly, I don't even know if it's I don't think. I'm pretty sure that's the penultimate of my fandom as a as a human. Child or teen, because you're always going to, I think, it's going to be better when you're a kid. This is the penultimate time for me. 86, which we'll get to. I'm 8, 9 years old, 88, right? 10. We're talking about, like, I'm at the games. I'm out there with my parents. I was there for all of the overtime goals and multiple overtime goals for Islander fans listening that Ferraro scored. I remember Benoit Hogue with a penalty shot in one of them in a second or a third overtime. I never heard that building that loud. I don't know if I've ever heard that building that loud until the Sean Bates penalty shot, which I did not put in there but could have. That run against the Leafs in 98, 99, I think it was, whatever, 99, 2000. I could, was it, I can't remember. I could have put that in here. I didn't. I was at those games too. I didn't put that in here. I'll give you one story, though, which I think is, for me, a fun story. It's one of my most memorable stories as a sports fan in my life. So, Nassau Coliseum, my mother had, and we used to like switch off, but she had the job on this day. Take a quick sip. So she had the job on this day in the Capitals series in the first round of driving me and 3 of my friends to the game. She'd drop us off. We always wanted to be there in time. To be there for, this pre-game skate and all that, and, start chanting, "Let's go Islanders," and get your overpriced chicken fingers and all that stuff, right? And then she would come back and pick us up usually at the time it was 7:30 starts. The games would end right around 10:15. And she'd tell us the spot she's going to be at, and that was that. Now, there's no cell phone. You had pay phones in the arena, but there were no cell phones. I didn't have a cell phone. I don't even think I had a beeper yet. Which, then I'm not going to answer it anyway. I'm going to call you back. Where am I going? There were like a couple of payphones in the arena, but that's it. No way to contact anybody. The game ends, the first 3 periods. The game ends, and I think this is the 4th or 5th longest game in Islander history. It's not the Easter Epic. It's not the one that they played a couple of years ago. I think it's still 3rd or 4th, though, playoff, longest game that the Islanders have been a part of. So I'm sitting there, and it was the beginning of the Ray Ferraro week. I believe this was the first one where he just went off, and I have still a ray of hope when he just basically was like going ape and going crazy and winning all these games in overtime. It was the star of the team. But here I am, and the game ends. And I'm thinking, okay, I know my mother's listening in the radio. This is what's going on in my head. I know she's listening. So, I mean, it's totally cool. It's no problem. Somebody will score quick, and she'll be fine. Like, it sucks, but she'll understand it's overtime. There were times where it's like I thought of running outside, which I technically could have, because I then could use your ticket to get back in. I assume. I've never done that in the middle of any game in my life, like, and come back in. Like a credential, yes, but a ticket, no. But I'm pretty sure you could do that. It's like a stamp at some bar. I mean, you could do it. Fine. I thought of it at the time, but it's so packed, and like, you got to pee, and then the line at the bathroom is too long, and I can't miss anything. Whatever happened, because I don't remember, I didn't go anywhere. And the first overtime starts. It's now 10:30. And then the first overtime ends. It's now 10 after 11. And again, in the intermission, and during the whole time, I'm thinking in every moment, and there aren't that many moments, telling my friends, like, what the hell are we going to do? Like, it's fine. Like she's going to be so fucking pissed at me. Like, all this stuff, right? And it's like, okay, what was I going to do? I mean, maybe there's something I could have done. I didn't do it. I didn't go out and find the car. I was like in a moment. I was like, I was living then. I'm like, oh, she's got to understand how historic and memorable this is. I mean, it sucks waiting in the parking lot, but could you imagine listening to this on the radio? It must be amazing. Like, this is like a stupid thing going on in my head at 15, right? Then the second overtime starts. And then it ends. And now it's after midnight. Like 12:15. Now it's 12:30. Now the third overtime is going to start. By the time Ferraro ended it, and I think this is the one he scored from. I was at all of them, but I think this was the one where I believe it was Brian Mullen who passed it to him. I think on a 2-on-1. I believe maybe it was Loisel. I think it was Mullen. So here we are. And there was a whole penalty shot, I think, in this. It was this several overtime game. Rick Tabaracci and Glenn Healy standing on their heads. It was amazing. So the Islanders win, and it's like euphoria in the building. It's an unbelievable atmosphere. Everybody's so excited. Like, I can't even believe it's happening. Like, my hair's on fire. I'm losing my mind. And then we get outside. It's 1 a.m. Okay, I want you to understand, a whole extra game has been played. It wasn't 3 full periods, but it was like 2.5. So basically, my mother came and sat for an entire other game in the parking lot, and there was no way to I couldn't text and say, yo, my B, like, there's nothing you could do, right? She's going to say, like, call it Uber. Like, there's no Uber. There's nowhere to go. She's there. So we walk out, and the car's right where it's supposed to be. My mother was so pissed off. Usually, like when parents, like when like your friends are around and they're really mad at you, but like they try and hold it back. Like they're giving you like a little, but they're not giving like side eye because like your friends are there and they don't want to like, take it out on them or have it be like rude with them. So you just know, like as soon as your friend's out of the car, like you hope there's a lot of traffic when you're dropping your friends off because you in some deep, right? You ever been there? Oh my God. She didn't care how the game was. I'm telling you, like years later, it was like PTSD looking at her face when I reminded her of sitting in that parking lot for 3 hours. 3 hours. I didn't care at the moment, and I went right back the next night. Or maybe there was a night off in the series, but I was at the next game. She didn't drive, clearly. And this was brought up, I think, until I drove 2 years later. I think every single time she dropped me off anywhere for the next 2 years, it was like, you understand, like, no matter what happens, this is the time you're coming out. Like, I don't care, like, you're making out with somebody, you're at a game, like, you got to pee, you had Taco Bell and you're in some friend's restroom, like, in the middle of a game on Genesis at the time, whatever. Like, you better be out. Number 8, the Islanders' 92-93 run. Number 7 is the Larry Johnson 4-point play in June of 1999, and the 99 Knicks season in general. That was Game 3 of the conference finals against the Pacers. I remember jumping literally off the ground into my friend's arms when we were watching this take place. It is still, and you can go on YouTube now. I think that's the loudest, and you could tell on YouTube. Like, I think it's the loudest I've ever seen an NBA building. If you see the shot, and it's usually like it's from up like in the rafters, where like in unison, everybody is like on their feet and freaking out when he hits the shot, and then they call the foul, and you know it's a 4-point play. And everybody hated Reggie Miller. I mean, now I love Reggie, working with him. It was great over the years. He's a terrific dude, but I couldn't stand him then. Like, that was like euphoria. I love that team. So this was a strike-shortened thing in 99, and it was like terrible. Look, 90s Knicks basketball was terrible as it is, right? 90s Knicks basketball in general was totally horrific. It was brutal. But it was like an amazing time to be a fan of those teams, because the 90s Knicks are like an unbelievable thing for me, and I'm a huge Knicks fan, right? So, like, they're going to be, and I'm looking at this list now, there are going to be some people who are going to be like, I can't believe you didn't have more Knicks stuff. Like, this is the only Knicks-related thing I have in here. I had in the 17, I'm looking at it now, I had it as 90s Knicks, like all the Miami Heat stuff. That's like one of my best time periods as a fan. But the Seminole Mullet, yeah, the Allen Houston, like the bouncing around, the P.J. Brown and you know, Charlie Ward, like there was some of that stuff. But here's the irony, and I don't know if any other Knicks fans are this way. I enjoyed, and it was a strike-shortened year, and you know, when Ewing got hurt, they weren't going to beat San Antonio to get all that. But when they were playing with Latrell Sprewell and Larry Johnson and Allen Houston and Marcus Camby out on the floor, and like they weren't slow all of a sudden, like they were like athletic, and they got like, you know, they had length on the wings, and they were like dunking and running around and like swag, but with plays athletically, not just with like Anthony Mason and Charles Oakley are about to like kick the shit out of you. It's like a different thing. I really enjoyed the hell out of that team in 99. And the Larry Johnson 4-point play was the seminal moment for me. So at 7, I've got that. 99 Knicks run, and Larry Johnson, that 4-point play in Game 3 of the conference final against the Pacers. Number 6, the 2006 New York Mets. And the specific moment I'm using, which is going to be weird, and I'll explain in a second, is the division clinch, which Steve Traxel pitched. They won, I think it was 6-0 against the Marlins. And a guy who, and this was one of these like pinch me moments in my life, but I was covering this. I was not, look, I'm a fan, but I was covering this team. But then, how many years later was it? It was, it was 7 years later that Cliff Lloyd, who caught that ball, would become my broadcast partner for 3 seasons. And still is a good friend. So it was kind of a cool thing in like looking back at it. But I'll tell you why the division clinch. And the whole 06 thing was amazing, right? I'll tell you one of my worst moments was after Yadier Molina hits the home run off Heilman and Andy Chavez and the strength to be here, and the catch wasn't like what it could have been because they lose, even though he robbed Scott Rowland. And then I'm in the champagne celebration with, the whole Wainwright. I got Mark McGuire who's a coach. Like, I hated all of it. Like, it just, like, I did it, and it came out to be a great show, and it's like, okay, pat on the back, like, professional moment for me, because, like, I couldn't stand what was happening. Like, I wanted to be in therapy immediately, and it was hard, admittedly. But I put the 06 run. I spent a lot of time with that team. I did a show. So during the year in 2006 and in 2007 for 2 years, for those who don't remember the pre-MLB Network days. So I had been, kind of, I don't know, the face of MLB.com. I don't know what that is. But I was doing all the show coverage and a lot of hosting for MLB.com. And I did something with the Red Sox covering them down the stretch in 2004. And the Mets picked up on it, and they liked it. And they wanted it to be part of their stadium stuff pregame also. So in 2006 and 2007, I hosted a show called Next Stop Shea, which I still, once a year, and it's so funny because a longtime friend and the cameraman and producer of that show, his name is Tom, I have, like, sometimes forwarded to him when I get these notes. I will randomly, like, happens at least once a year on a DM or somebody in public or something, like, is like Next Stop Shea, and I'm like, you watch that shit? Like, just like $350K, right? But I did a show that was, it was basically like it was a weekly show, episodic, 10 to 15 minutes long, usually, of like kind of like Mets Weekly. They have some interviews and breakdowns of the games that were happening, and they showed it every game pregame. That season was a cool thing for me because even though I had been in the business a couple of years, like I would be at, you have to understand, like, and I'm still this way. I'm a pinch me diehard. Like, it's why I bounced the ball to home plate when I saw myself on the screen. I was like, really, is this happening? Like, I don't, even in moments I've had, like, God bless, like, to be able to have a career, right? Like, I don't feel those things in that moment. I'm just either like, riding on it or having fun or concentrating and locked into work. I don't, like, there's no, I'm no different than anybody. But there are some moments that are like so cool where it's like I stay grounded, like never too big in my own head, but I can't sometimes stay grounded with how cool some of this stuff is just because I'm a fan of these sports. To be there at that stadium that year and every game and pregame, like our show that I was doing was like not on 350K, but like on Diamond, like I was losing my mind, right? At Shea, I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding? Like that was a huge thing for me. As a kid, like that was a blip for anybody else, and somebody else is like, why the hell is this crap on? But like it was just such a huge deal for me then. But being there, I got really good access, and we got to be there every day. And I'll never forget the clinch when they clinched that division. I could tell you a million stories for anybody who could see the video. By the way, you could still find, if you Google Next Stop Shea, you could find on MLB.com all the videos. You could still watch them. And you'll see when they clinch the division, Billy Wagner gets the last out. I'm literally, they're still in the walk-in line. That's the kind of access we had. And I was the first interview. He literally had they just won. And I did a host of interviews. It was the first champagne celebration for the Mets I'd ever done. I mean, I'd done the Red Sox stuff in 2004, but with no offense to Boston, as amazing as it was. And I don't regret, I mean, clearly it's being a part of a historic moment, right, that I've covered. And it's probably the most historic thing I've been a part of in my career. Like, I mean, it wasn't the Mets. This is the Mets. I can give you a million stories, but I'll give you one for a Met fan, which is one of my favorite stories to tell. And if you go look at the video, and you can find it, you will see this playing out in part. Like, I don't remember how much of it we discussed as this was happening, and it was edited down to like 15 minutes. But it has to do with Carlos Delgado, who I loved. Like, I was in the clubhouse during all those, know your role and why you asking me with Billy Wagner and all that stuff. And Beltran and Delgado were on the other side. And who are they referring to? And Jose, right? All that, right? I love Delgado. I had never a problem with him. Like, he was always very charismatic I thought he was a good dude. So Carlos Delgado, they came back out on the field. For those who were there, after they went and celebrated underneath, they came back out on the field. And you could see this in the video, and I wish I had a clip I could show it to you. Maybe I can make one, but you can go Google it. He is attempting to smoke a cigar. You could tell Carlos Delgado was handed a lit cigar and had no idea what he was doing. Now, I don't care if you're a cigar smoker or not. I'm not. Like, I have plenty in my day. Like, it's fine. Like, especially, once I was working at Turner with Chef, it was like a rite of passage. You had to. We would watch the games outside. So that's another behind the scenes. They would say, so they had like the green room where everybody watched the games. For most of the Turner years that you saw me, like Chef and I watched them like with each other outside. They set up like this outside, there's like a lounge area, like with a TV, and a couch so that Chef could smoke his cigars. And like I literally, that's like probably most of my cigar smoking has taken place, right? So man, we stunk up that set most of those nights for sure. But Carlos Delgado had no idea how to smoke a cigar. And if you find this video, you will see it. I don't think I talk about it to him about it in the video. I did. It didn't make the cut. But you will see that when it was not that windy that night, from what I remember, all I remember looking over and seeing is he is holding the cigar where it is smoking back into his eye. And then when he's blowing it, he's blowing the smoke instead of... Now, look, I'm a smoker. It sucks. It's terrible. But I'm just saying. Instead of like away, forget about on me. He's blowing the smoke of the cigar, like I'm showing you a podcast, like if you're watching it, like up into his own face. So now you've got the cigar smoke that's coming up in his eye, and he's blowing the smoke into his own eye as he's talking to me. Then he starts rubbing his own eye as he's talking to me. Then his eye starts tearing, like he's literally crying, but not from winning the division title. All of this in a 5-minute interview I did with him on the field, of which at least a good minute and a half is in this show. And if you can find it, it still definitely exists, you will see this take place. He was blowing the cigar smoke in his own eye, and it was literally like right in front of me, like turning red. And I remember they did not. I don't think they kept it in the show, but I remember because then it had to play in the postseason, like on the big board, and when they made it, all that stuff. Like I don't think they kept it in. But like I was trying to like explain to him how to smoke a cigar. It's one of my like favorite moments that like only I like know existed, even though it's kind of on air. It's like the cut that didn't make it. But Carlos Delgado not knowing how to smoke a cigar is what I remember. And that moment and that night and covering that and being a part of that after being a fan of that team, that put that in there for me. So I got the '06 Mets and the division clincher specifically because of going through that at number 6. Number 5, the Mets, Game 5 of the 2000 National League Championship Series. And this one is definitely personal. So this was a 2000 team that was not very good, that had no business being in the World Series. I mean, look, I always joke with Steve Phillips, like Kurt Abbott was your shortstop. Like this is not a great team, okay? This was not a great team, but they were not as good as the 99 team, who, by the way, is higher on this list, and I'll explain. But Game 5 of the 2000 NLCS is one of the greatest fan moments of my life. It was on my birthday, which, how many of these moments happen to take place? Now, my birthday's in October, so it works out this way. 2 of these are on my birthday. Which, by the way, also was the same day as the earthquake in San Francisco, like some of the like craziest, in a lot of different ways, postseason moments in the sport, just because it's on the 17th, send your gifts. 2000, Game 5 of the NLCS. I'm supposed to go to the game with 2 of my friends and my father. My father is going to meet us there. I took the train with my guys. My father was going to work, and then afterwards, he was going to meet us, and we were going to meet at a certain spot outside Shea, and we were going to meet, I think it was like half an hour before the game. I believe it was like a 7:40 start, but it was like half an hour before the game. Game 5. This is the Ankiel game. This is Mike Hampton throwing a 3-hitter and becoming the MVP of the LCS when the Mets eventually got to the Subway Series. That's all this here, okay? So we're supposed to meet my father about a half an hour before. And still I remember because I was using payphones. There were no cell phones or anything. There was no way to like text anybody or to find out anything. But 30 minutes before comes, and there's nobody there. 20 minutes comes, there's nobody there. The game's about to start. There's nobody there. I call my mother because I knew she was home. My dad didn't have a car phone, and they were divorced, but I knew like maybe she had an idea. I asked if she had heard from him. She was very thankful I called because he called her because he couldn't contact me, hoping I would call. His car broke down, and he's finding a way to get to the stadium. Now, I can tell you having a car breakdown sucks. I had never had it happen to me in my life, and it happened to me not once, but twice in the last 4 months. With stories behind each, I don't even want to tell on the pod because I'll get too aggravated. It's not a fun thing to happen. Not a fun thing to happen at all. It's happened to me twice. I had a car literally break while I was driving about a month and a half ago. This is not a fun thing to go through. But I'm thinking at the time, like, how's he going to get to the park? What do you mean he's going to get there? Like, is he going to take the train? How's he getting to the train? All these things. How am I going to know if he's here? All this stuff, right? So now the game's starting, and my friends go up to the seats. We're up at the bottom part of the highest level on the upper deck in between left field and third base. Right near Benny and the Mets. Benny Agbayani. My father was supposed to be on his way, but I had no idea when, and I just waited. And then I called my mother again. She hadn't heard anything. And I just waited. And into the first inning, I think it was in the bottom of the inning, so it was a good 45 minutes to an hour after he was supposed to be there, which is not a problem, but it is what it is. There's my father. My father's car had broken down on the Grand Central Parkway, for those who understand Shea Stadium or, now Citi Field and had a drive in that area. Had broken down the Grand Central Parkway. He hitchhiked and found a guy after I think it was two or three, I'd have to ask, 2 or 3 failures of somebody who wouldn't drive, but found somebody who he was selling the story, which is a true story. My son, his birthday is going to be at midnight, which is true. And at the time I was going to be, 22. His birthday is coming up at midnight, and he's there with his friends, and this is a huge moment, and I got to get to him. And it's a Grand Central, so it wasn't too far. I mean, he was about like 10, 15 minutes away. But somebody who must have been a father, and I don't remember at this point, somebody picked him up and drove him and dropped him off at the stadium. We watched a 6-0 shutout. Todd Zeal broke it open with a double in the gap. That stadium was shaking more than I've ever felt the stadium shake. To this day in my life, I have never, and Coliseum was that way with sound. I've never sat in a stadium that I felt, we always say it feels like it's shaking. I've never, like it's like a rising fastball. Well, that doesn't exist, right? 110%. Well, you can only give 100. I'm telling you right now, nope, no bullshit. The stadium was shaking. The entire upper deck, and Shea was a shithole. The whole thing was shaking. You could barely hear yourself. It was like if a plane came overhead, which they did often there, as people know, you wouldn't have been able to hear that either. It was amazing. And after the game, we now had no car. It's my birthday. I remember being in the parking lot, and we ended up finding one of these car services that was waiting over by AAA Auto Glass, like near the stadium, for those who remember Shea well. And we found a car service that it just was the luck of this day. Like some days in your life, this happens. I've had a lot that don't, but you hope for the ones that do, where the guy hadn't shown up. And we were able to make a deal for cash. I don't remember how much it cost, but I do remember this. We got in this car service. We were listening to on radio on WFAN the post game and the champagne interviews and everything of a team about to go to the World Series to face the Yankees. And what do you know, 15 minutes into the drive, as we passed down Grand Central Parkway, there was my father's car still sitting there over off the side of the road, which he ended up getting the next day. And it was my birthday. And I remember going back and watching in my basement on my TV, which was like my little dungeon man cave area, my friend and I, like all the post-game stuff for like 2 hours. All the interviews, Piazza, all those guys. That's number 5 for me. And by the way, storytelling apparently takes a long time, so I'll try and be briefer on these. But this is, I hope people enjoy stories like this and think about their own. That's the whole point. It's about like all of us sharing with each other. I love hearing stories like this about kind of how people go through being a fan. Number 4 for me. So I got Islander runs conference finals 2021 at 10. Jim Abbott's no-hitter September 4th, 1993 at 9. Islanders 1992-93 at 8. The LJ 4-point play in Game 3 of the conference finals at 7. 2006 Mets in the division clincher in 6. Number 5, the Mets Game 5, 2000 NLCS. Number 4, the New York Giants, Super Bowl 42, the 18-1 Pats. I'll be brief on this, just for time, okay? When you think about, like, surprises as a fan, where your teams, like I just mentioned, like, look, 2015 crept up on me as a Met fan, right? It's like, this isn't going to happen, right? Nothing really crept up on me more. And I know 9-7 the Giants were in 2011 and yada, yada. But it was like, I'd seen them already do this before, and that kind of made everything possible. Nothing crept up on me more than this run with the Giants. The Brett Favre game in the cold, where, I mean, Lawrence Tynes is missing, 3 field goals, and finally, or he missed 2, finally hit the 3rd one. The fact that nobody trusted Eli, and then all of a sudden he's pulling off these performances. The Cowboys in the playoffs. That whole run. I remember being at a bar. I was at a bar for this Super Bowl with a couple of buddies and a lot of other people. It was like a New Year's kind of setup. I remember it. I don't remember which bar it was, being totally honest with you. But it was in Manhattan, and they were like, you paid like $40, and there's like cups, and there's like, there were snacks, and there was all kinds of different like, wings and yada, yada, whatever. Blasting all the commentary in the bar. It was an amazing experience. That Super Bowl was, I remember being outside at halftime, and you knew they were in it. Like, you knew they had spooked Brady. You knew they were in it. I remember walking out, because I could tell you, which is true. I remember walking out of the bar afterwards, and people were screaming, and it was like Manhattan looked like I Am Legend, and then all of a sudden, it looked like a legendary moment. Everyone was, I want to say, running out of the bars like it was a horror movie, but everybody's out of the bars. People on phones. You hear 100,000 different conversations. You got people lighting up cigarettes. I mean, probably joints. Who knows what else? I mean, fireworks if they could have. It was lunacy, and I was in Midtown. It was crazy. It was crazy and all jacked up in the best way. But I remember being there at halftime and walking outside of this bar at the time, which is terrible. Don't smoke, and it's bad for you. Going to have a cigarette. And literally, there are people across the avenues, right? There's no one driving. There's people across the avenues that you're screaming across like, hey, what about this play and that decision, a punter? They should have gone for fourth. I mean, it was insane. Like, that was like, it wasn't as feeling driven as some of the others I've mentioned, but I mean, that run for the Giants, and I'm a diehard Giant fan, was unbelievably memorable. For time purposes, I'll leave it there. But number 4. Number 3, these are all big. Number 3 is my 21st birthday, October 17th, 1999, also known as the Grand Slam single. Your 21st birthday, you want to be a memorable thing. I remember I went to Atlantic City after I was look, I had a fake ID, people. You shouldn't. It was bad. I was from Vermont. I at least had my own name. Didn't have facial hair then. It would have helped me. But I remember being 21. I went to Atlantic City after my 21st birthday. That was like kind of the trip. But the day of, I was in Atlantic City. No. I was watching the Grand Slam single. That run in 99, that was a better team than 2000. I say that all the time. I've been there for some great moments. I was there when Pratt hit the home run just over the fence, and Steve Finley couldn't get it. That was a great game. There's some of these great playoff games in those 2 runs. 99 was a better team than 2000. That Grand Slam single was the craziest shit ever, okay? I mean, forget about the fact that Pratt doesn't let him go to second base. I love Robin Ventura. I still love Robin Ventura, okay? He's a great dude. Like, getting a cover, when I was covering it nationally, meet him a number of times and interview him in person a number of times when he was managing the White Sox. He's a great dude. He put together a moment that literally it was like, this is my 21st birthday. I'm a diehard Met fan. I hate the Braves at the time. I hated those teams. I was like, I hate the Braves. And we're in this series. If we could just win this game somehow. If we could just get to 7. And by the way, when Piazza hit the home run off Maddox, which I mentioned before, I thought I thought all these things were like signs. Really? Off Maddox? I'm like, oh my God. These are all signs. Not so much. You know what I mean? Like, look, I lived through and covered, Tom Glavine down, who I love, but, Tommy down 7-0 to, Miguel Olivo and Josh Willingham and company and all that nightmare. I've seen the bad side, but like you just felt like that thing, like you feel now watching this team. Like there was like 99, like there was something like this team not going away, and it was like the black unis were first legit. Like this was a beloved team in 99. That's the best infield I've ever watched on any team I've ever rooted for. Clearly, the infield they have right now is great. Take nothing away from defensively when Guillorme's at third, and you got Lindor and McNeil, and those are all stars, and Alonso. I get that, right? But Olerud and Alfonso and Ordonez and Ventura, I mean, they were like 4 Hoover vacuums in the infield. I've never seen a defensive infield that good, ever. John Olerud may be the most underrated. The most underrated baseball players, I think, of like my prime era as a baseball fan are probably Bobby Abreu and John Olerud. Honestly. Bobby Abreu is probably the most underrated. People don't realize how good Bobby Abreu is. I did an hour once on the radio a couple of years ago with Spilly, where we just shouted off Bobby Abreu stats and had people writing back like, holy shit, like I had no idea. Like Bobby Abreu, if you do it just in stats, he sounds like Tony Gwynn. Like people have no idea how good that dude was. Like he's so good. Such a great hitter. But John Olerud was like, people remember like, oh, he had the helmet, and like I think I could beat him in a foot race. I joked if you go back to my Twitter when Marte officially signed, one of the first tweets I said was, I want to know how many times he could lap John Olerud around the bases before Olerud made it once. Yeah, I mean, when he used to have no speed. But that game, that team, For that Grand Slam single and all of that everybody knows about, I'm not going to tell you what happened. On my 21st birthday? Are you kidding? That's why I lost the television when I threw it, literally, which is also true. And I've told this story in a previous pod, but I'll say it again. And if he's listening, or you could ask him, he would tell you. Because some of these stories I tell, they may sound like that can't be real. Like, who would do that? Like, I'm nuts enough. I'm telling you right now, you go ask Jim Duquette, who's one of my better friends in life, who I worked with for, I don't know, a decade and a half at 2 different places. You go ask him the first time we were going to work together, which was at MLB.com, way before we were together on radio, working, doing stuff for the same place. I invited him out to dinner, and I took him to a steakhouse in Manhattan, and I sat him down, and I told him at the beginning, this is so that we can clear the air. He didn't even know me. Like, what air was I clearing? He didn't hate me. I had to clear the air about all of the moves that I wasn't approving of, that he had been a part of. He had to go through Bordick, Melvin Mora. We had to discuss Zambrano. And one of the first things he could tell you, you ask him, you go tweet, he will tell you about the dinner. He'll laugh. We still laugh about that. It is so true. Because, like, who would do that? I did that. Here, a GM in the league, like, who the hell am I? And I invited him to dinner because we had to clear the air about all the things he pissed me off. It's true. But I asked him why the hell was Dotel not on the mound instead of Kenny Rogers? That's one of the first. You ask him. One of the first questions I asked. Number 10, New York Islanders runs to the conference finals in 20 and 21. Jim Abbott's no-hitter in September 4th, 1993. The New York Islanders 92-93 run at number 8. Number 7, LJ's 4-point play in Game 3 of the conference finals. Number 6, the 2006 Mets, and my moment, their division clincher, and explained why. Number 5, Mets Game 5 2000 NLCS. Number 4, the Giants' 2008 run, Super Bowl 42, the 18-1 Super Bowl, of course. Number 3, October 17th, 1999, my 21st birthday, and the Grand Slam single. At number 2, Game 6, 1986, and the ball gets by Buckner. Here comes night, and the Mets win it. As a kid, when you first start to fall in love with anything, you remember it forever. I will have a relationship with the Thundercats for this reason, like my whole life, all right? My kid will have a relationship with, and you could just ask him, with Spider-Man or any of the Avengers for the rest of his life for the same reason, all right? And he's right now 8 years old, which is what I was in 1986. Literally, I turned 8 right then during that series. When you think about as a little kid, like moments, my superheroes, okay? I loved Star Wars as a kid. I never was a G.I. Joe guy. I was a Star Wars guy. I was a Transformers, even GoBots I would like. I'm not a comic book guy. I've never owned a comic book. Nothing wrong with it, but I'm not. I've gotten into comics and movies through Marvel and the movies. I never read the comics. Wasn't like an Archie comics buy. I had the Garbage Pail Kids when they were the thing. But I was a like Ewok Village guy. Like that's who I was. Excuse me. So for me, my superheroes were Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, Lenny Dykstra, Wally Backman, Tim Tuffle, Doug Sisk. I mean, anyone. Like, I don't care, like the ball boy, like everyone in the 80s Mets. Those were my superheroes growing up. My favorite players were Dwight Gooden and Lenny Dykstra. My superheroes growing up were those guys. And, you know, Lenny Dykstra, who I ended up living close to and then dating a girl who lived in Simi Valley and would get a car washed at his car. It was a very different life when I grew up from Lenny Dykstra. But I always believed in, and I still do, that, like, you know, my personality is very much like what I thought he was like in terms of playing. I will shove my face through a wall for somebody to go help my team win, right? And that's why he was nails, right? I loved those teams. I was obsessed with Howard Johnson. I was obsessed with all of those guys. Like, all of them. Like, 88, Oral Hershiser, he's like the nicest guy. I've gotten to meet him now a million times. Nicest guy. I could not stand, like, literally, I wanted to put this guy like on a Jobu Pedro Serrano doll. Like, I couldn't stand this guy after 88. Now, Mike Scott, I don't think I ever liked. That never turned back around. But those 80s teams, that's my childhood, man. Like, that's man, woman, whoever, right, obviously. But that's my childhood. That's everything to me. Those are my superheroes. Watching that develop and watching those games with my father and listening to Bob Murphy, it's a time period that I wish for my son. To have a relationship with a team that gave the joy that that team gave to me. I mean, it's you could see it if you watch it. It's emotional. That team and that, I mean, from the starting lineup figures I had to the baseball cards I had albums of 14 Danny Heap cards. I mean, literally, I had everything. All right. They were my superheroes. That was a big time in creating the sports fan and person I become from a sports side. So 86 for sure. The top 10 list of the most memorable moments for me is that almost wear me out emotionally. It's either that or talking for an hour and 10 minutes about stories. Mets better win tonight. Is that Homer of me? Number 10, most memorable New York sports moments. Jason and Albany created, of course. Not the list, but, number 10, Islanders runs conference final 20 and 21. Jim Abbott's no-hitter September 4th, 1993. Number 8, the Islanders' 92-93 run. Number 7, 99 Knicks season. LJ's 4-point play, Game 3 of the conference final. Number 6, the 2006 Mets moment division clinch overall. Number 5, the Mets Game 5 of the 2000 NLCS. Number 4, the Giants, Super Bowl 42, 2008 season, 18-1 Pats. Number 3, 21st birthday, October 17th, 1999, Grand Slam single. Number 2, Game 6, 1986, and the ball gets by Buckner. And number 1, the most memorable sports moment of my lifetime, 9/20/101. This is in a category of its own. This, I always say, I believe Lake Placid was the greatest moment in the history of American sports. It doesn't matter, and God bless, hopefully, God willing, so I can see my kids grow up and get married and have success. I'll live as long as I can, right? It doesn't matter how long I live, there won't be a better sports moment or a memorable sports-related moment than 9/20/101. It's not going to happen. Something could break number 2 and get above 86 in this list for me. But anybody who was at that game, 9/20/101, there's nothing that could get to number 1 ever. It never will. I knew I wanted to go to the game. I knew I wasn't afraid. I was excited about the opportunity to be part of a night and a group of people where you said, we're not giving up. We're still here, right? You didn't take this from us. The day before that game, my 2 friends and I only have 2 of my friends at the time that were big Met fans. We were all working in offices at the time. And we started sending emails back and forth to each other. We were all looking for tickets. And I don't remember exactly how much. They were expensive. It was like $400 a ticket that I think what we ended up paying. We had to go to somebody's office who had the tickets. I don't think it was like before Craigslist. I don't remember how that we did it or what site we used. But we had found somehow that some guy in some office in Manhattan, in this street, we had to go pick up. We met at this guy's office outside. We went in, we picked up the tickets, and then we went and got on the subway, got on the train, then the subway. Being in that building is one of the prouder moments that I was lucky enough to be a part of. Not proud for me, but proud of everything that was happening and being able to see it. The emotion during that national anthem, the emotion during Liza Minnelli, and it was Mark Anthony, right? I think it was the national anthem. There was a lot of different singing. When Liza Minnelli sang, the roof blew off that place. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. There were 5 different times during that game I was crying. Everyone was crying. I always reference it this way when I talk about this game. I'm Jewish, but I've nothing against Jewish women, but I've never really dated any. So I've been to church plenty. the only way to explain it, I mean, it's in a complimentary way. It was like being at church where everybody's like, peace be with you, and you just feel like it's like you're together, even if you don't know the people. I mean, it's a great feel. I mean, it's complimentary. It's a phenomenal thing to even, for a moment, kind of feel what that's like. That's what that building was times like 1,000. I've never seen anything like it before. Anybody who's been in playoff games, you could high five people you don't know. You get into conversations you don't know. I've been at Islander games in the rafters where I have gotten, found myself like defending. I'll never forget. Remember, there was this woman who they had ripped her poster in half, like these Ranger fans, and we ended up getting into a near fist fight. You're like defending people because they're they're part of us, right? Never anything like this. Never. Nothing close to anything like this. I don't know how to describe what that was like. Every time I hear the call of Mike Piazza's home run and relive it, it's like if the home run call was longer, I'd cry. I start to feel that feeling, and then it's like in Cool Runnings where they lift up the, once they do the slow clap, forget it. I'm out. I've said that forget it. Like, I watched it last week, by the way. Since I did that pod, I watched the Cool Runnings. Out. Forget it. Like, I mean, the ugly cry. Like, as soon as they start slow clapping, forget me. Like, you might as well just, literally, put it, I'm hiding in a corner somewhere. That's the Piazza thing. Is just, it just takes you a different place. That was the most unified I've ever felt in a large setting in my whole life. Never felt anything like that. It's hard to compare it to anything else. Been in bigger moments, look, I was at David Freeze's Game 6, and I was only 7 rows behind home plate waiting to get on the field when that happened. I've been blessed and very lucky, just lucky to be in a lot of those spots. I've never felt anything like 9/20/101. It's the greatest sporting event of my life. And when I say proud, again, it's like I didn't do anything. I'm proud that I can share this story with my kids one day, and that I was in the building as a fan, just being able to just soak up what that was like. Those are moments the moments that are memorable to you as a sports fan, the moments that hit you. I'm an emotionally passionate human, right? I'm a passionate sports fan. What you see is what you get. When that stuff connects, for me, when they both hit the same place, I mean, tissues won't be enough. I need T-shirts, towels. By the way, if you need T-shirts, Prospects are cool T-shirts. You can get them at Cotton Viewer and at the Believe store. All that information on my Twitter. Join the Unfiltered Revolution. Jason, appreciate you giving me a reason to take you down memory lane. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this. Please reach out. I love the feedback. I mean, it's been great reading some of this stuff on iTunes and the comments and some of the DMs and tweets. But it's meaningful to me, and I love your ideas. So bring them to me. Keep bringing them and keep being interactive and stay on board. But that's a wrap for Unfiltered episode 38. You gotta believe. BLEAV. Peace.